name's Stuart Ashman. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of SkinBio Therapeutics. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me. Okay, so just a little snapshot. We listed on AIM in April 2017, so we're a little over 2.5 years old. We raised £4.5 million worth of funds at that time at 9 pence. Current share price is hovering around the 16 pence mark, and we have a market cap about 21 million. We just released our annual report yesterday and declared our cash position at the end of June of this year at 3.1 million. We did raise an additional 1.5 million in February of this year at 16 pence. Our AIM ticker is SBTX. That's a list of our major shareholders, which accounts for about 72% of our shares, and of which we've issued about 128 million. We've made some significant progress since IPO, both operationally and scientifically. From an operational perspective, we scaled up production at cosmetic grade product. We did that through a third party in the United States. We basically established a freeze-dried method, which gives us significant shelf life and ease of transportation, as well as a very stable formulation. We generate significant safety data to support that too. From a scientific perspective, we defined the dosage and the frequency, and we completed our human studies and had our patent granted in several additional regions. And that's obviously an ongoing piece of work. And we secured a grant to proceed with further pipeline studies with our partners at the University of Manchester. So I'd like to spend a few minutes talking to you a little bit about skin and about why it's so important to us. So skin is the largest human organ. It covers about 2 square meters and accounts for about 15% of our body weight. It weighs about an average of 9 pounds in an average human, and the average adult has approximately 21 square feet of skin. Contains more than 11 miles of blood vessels, and most people have about 300 million skin cells. Single square inch, sorry, I've just mentioned that. We've got about 300 sweat glands in a single square inch, and not surprisingly, skin is thickest on your feet at 1.4 millimeters, and it's thinnest on your eyelids at 0.2 millimeters, and it's home to more than 1,000 species of bacteria. And I think, as we all know, changes to your skin can often signal changes in your overall health, rashes, spots, even things like jaundice, etc. Your skin renews itself every 28 days and is constantly shedding cells, about 30,000 to 40,000 cells every minute. And again, that's about another 9 pounds in weight a year. And some sources estimate that half of the dust in your average house is actually made up of dead skin. It comprises about 1 billion tons of dust in the Earth's atmosphere. So we're all kind of breathing it right now, each other's skin, which is a bit of a terrifying thought. So there's some sort of mostly unknown or generally ignored facts about skin. Talk now specifically about the microbiome. And the microbiome is a term that you're starting to hear a lot more of, and it's a term that's used to describe the community of microorganisms that live in, on, and around our bodies. It's all interconnected, and these microorganisms are often described as the friends that we never knew we had. The human microbiome has extensive functions, such as the development of immunity, defense against pathogens, hosting of nutrition, including production of short-chain fatty acids, which are very important in hosting energy metabolism, the synthesis of vitamins and fat storage, as well as influence on human behavior itself. So it's a vital function, and the human microbiome is an organ in its own right. In terms of the skin microbiome, it's an increasing area of interest worldwide. We see more and more articles and papers, interviews, etc. There's been nearly 600 this year to date. When you think about in 2006, there was literally only 60 papers or articles. You hear this phrase regularly, microbiome friendly. In fact, there's a couple of well-known brands advertising that on TV right now. Not really sure what microbiome friendly means, but I'm about to talk about something that's not so friendly. The rise of the superbug. In recent decades, our microbiomes have been altered by poor dietary habits, We've overused disinfectants, antibiotics. I think we've all heard doctors saying they won't prescribe more antibiotics. We've overdone it in the past. And I think we've all seen advertising that says kills all known germs dead, kills 99% of all bacteria. Not really sure what that 1% is that they're not interested in killing, but there you go. And I think every single person in this room, somewhere underneath the sink, has got a bottle of antibacterial spray, which we spray our surfaces, our chopping boards, etc. with. And that's great. You're killing bacteria, but we're killing good bacteria as well as bad bacteria. We've been literally stripping the vital good bacteria away from our bodies, from the surfaces, from everything around us. Nurseries, hospitals, everywhere you go, there's antibacterial gel, antibacterial sprays, antibacterial air sprays, leading to the evolution of superbugs, specifically MRSA. So, in terms of MRSA, I'm not going to go into too much detail about this. Basically, it's been created by ourselves, by our own overuse of antibacterial sprays, of antibiotics for treatments of viruses, etc., etc. It preys on the vulnerable. You see it often attacking intensive care units, operating rooms, pediatric wards, and geriatric wards. This is a short trailer for an actually feature-length film documentary about the overuse of antibiotics.
From the very beginning of the antibiotic era, there's been this parallel story of misusing antibiotics in agriculture, of giving antibiotics to animals that are not sick, that do not need them.
Antimicrobial resistance is a global crisis.
The problem of antimicrobial resistance has reached alarming levels.
Extensively drug resistance to tuberculosis has been identified in 105 countries.
This is Armageddon. This is the end of our current regime of antibiotics.
If we don't do something about antimicrobial resistance, in another 35 years, there could be 10 million people a year dying. The policymakers only move when the tsunami is there.
And I do worry about that. I lose sleep about it.
It's important to not walk away from the battlefield.
If we truly lost all our antibiotics, it would be a bomb blowing up our healthcare systems around the world.
Powerful stuff. I would urge every one of you, if you get a chance to watch that movie, please do so. It's fascinating stuff. It's also quite frightening. Antibiotics and antibacterial sprays, etc., have been seen as one of the greatest inventions in modern medical history. And we as a race have overused and abused them. So they were seen as a miracle, and frankly, the miracle is fading. Antibiotic resistance is a very serious problem, and doctors and the medical profession fear that despite researchers' best efforts, these superbugs will continue to emerge, adapt, and mutate to maintain resistance against antibacterials and antibiotics. As I said, it strikes patients in healthcare settings, specifically those with weakened immunity, the old, the infirm, the young, those who are recovering from wounds and infections, etc. So the fact of the matter is we are at war and we are losing, and what are we going to do about it? So SkinBioTherapeutics, this is the brainchild of Professor Kath O'Neill, who is the Professor of Transformational Dermatology at the University of Manchester. Her and her team effectively basically stripped a bacteria from the gut. In this case, the bacteria is Lactobacillus rhamnosus. And Lactobacillus rhamnosus is very well proven in a number of gut conditions. It prevents pathogens from invading the gut, it strengthens the barrier, and it also assists in healing wounds. And all of those benefits that work in the gut apply equally to the skin. So people get a little bit surprised when Professor Kath talks about taking this probiotic and smashing it to bits. And I wish I could give you a much more scientific description of that, but that's exactly what we do. We take this probiotic, and that's where our IP kicks in. The process of taking that bacteria from the stomach, from the gut, and turning it into a lysate, a much more stable extract, that's exactly what we do, and that's where the magic happens. Does it work? Well, let's have a look. So what you see now, the panel on the left and the two green slides show how much important barrier protein is present in the skin. So this green line here, the shading is the skin. When treated with SkinBioTherapeutics, which is the proprietary, the term that we use for our proprietary science, you can see how enhanced and how supercharged, reinforced that barrier becomes. The two slides on the right, the blue area is the surface of the skin. What you can't see, I think because of the lighting, is there are multiple red and purple dots here. Those red and purple dots that have basically invaded the skin and gone right through the architecture of the skin, that is Staphylococcus aureus. So Staphylococcus aureus is the SA in MRSA. You can see that when the same skin has been treated with SkinBioTherapeutics, you now see a solid line of defense. There are no Staphylococcus aureus infections. It has not breached the skin at all. They're non-existent. And that's because our lysate prevents the latching of Staphylococcus aureus. We don't kill bacteria. In fact, we're concerned with preserving good bacteria. What we do is prevent Staphylococcus aureus, very aggressive bacteria, from latching to the skin. And we do that by inhibiting the adhesion, by enhancing the expression of tight junction proteins and the function of tight proteins, tight junctions themselves, rather. We recently reported on our human safety study, which was carried out along the path that we're proceeding for the treatment of eczema. A side piece of data that came off that talked about anti-aging. We saw a significant increase in the elastic fibers, the elasticity of the skin, and obviously that makes some significant claims towards anti-aging. What you need to be looking at here is the undulations, which obviously we lose in time, and also these candelabra-like structures, these purple structures here, that are now shortened and quite vague. When treated with SkinBioTherapeutics, you see those undulations return, and you see these nice, strong candelabra sort of shapes, much darker in color, which again is showing that we increase the elastic fiber within the skin. So in terms of a strategy, what we're going to do with this science, I was once quoted when I first started with this company in saying you could become a very busy fool chasing this science. And every time we turn a page, we find another application for this science. And the question really is now one of focus. So we've decided to focus on 5 very specific areas. Why have we chosen them? Good question. This is about the path of least resistance. So if you look at an axis of cost and time, with pharmaceutical being at the top of that staircase, it is by far the most costly and by far the longest period of time. We've heard some presenters this evening talk about how complex that regulatory path is, and it truly is. That RX market is huge, it's very, very profitable indeed, but the trials are lengthy, they're expensive, and as such it sits right at the top of the tree. At the other end of the scale here is SkinBioTherapeutics, is the cosmetic market. So using our lysate as an ingredient into cosmetic applications. Believe it or not, if you're not testing on animals, this is the fastest route to market. It's the least complex in terms of regulatory approval, and it's the least expensive. And last week we announced a deal with Croda PLC, and I'll come on to detail that in a little while. Next step up, you've got Axis Biotic, which is all about food supplements. Surprisingly, if you were going to take something as a food supplement and ingest it, the regulatory path is lower than the next step up, which is a topical application of a product on your skin. Again, trials required, long regulatory path, or certainly longer than the first 2 steps. And then somewhere in between pharmaceuticals and the MediBiotics, the medical devices, is hospital-acquired infection and the cleansing of hospitals and professional spaces. There's also an application there for domestic cleaning when I talked about antibacterial sprays, etc. So it's the path of least resistance. The lowest hanging fruit happens to be the cosmetic market. That's why we chose to strike there first. Specifically, as I've said, fastest regulatory path. We've now got anti-aging claims that we can put in there. There are creams these days for pretty much everything. In fact, that whole cosmetic market's relatively new to me, but it's a fascinating area. And yeah, I didn't mean it like that. So we did a partnership with Croda PLC. They're a 1.3 billion FTSE 100 company. They've got a specialist cosmetic division in Paris called Sederma. They've got a very large global portfolio of customers. There is a potential there for us to do own label, launch our own brand. That's not what we do, but it is a potential there. It's part of the deal. And it's a $100 billion area of high growth. Next up is Axis Biotic, which talks about the gut-skin axis, which is taking a food supplement which causes a reaction on the skin. The initial area that we've looked at there is psoriasis. So you would take a powder that you sprinkle on your cornflakes, put in your tea or coffee, that would basically prevent the outbreak of psoriasis, the flaring, as it's called, of psoriasis. Again, likewise with eczema, huge markets, lots and lots of potential there. We've even had a little peek down the whole UV protection. Could you put something in your water and your tea that would increase the skin's natural UV protection? Low regulatory requirement, reasonably swift route to market, and we are currently in advanced negotiations with formulators and manufacturers to bring this to a commercial fruition. Next up is MediBiotics. This is our core science. This is what the company was IPO'd on the back of. This is talks about topical applications of creams for, again, the reduction in flare-ups and eczema, psoriasis, even acne. They're obviously all areas that we're looking at. And this talks specifically of our science's ability to enhance the barrier, the skin's natural barrier. There are obviously some advanced wound care applications, and we are at the start of discussions now with some global wound care providers, advanced wound care providers. So again, another fascinating market. Next up is pharmaceuticals. As we said, very lengthy, but it's highly lucrative. And we think there's a direct correlation between Axis Biotics and Pharma Biotics. If we can prove through a food supplement, a lower regulatory path, that we can actually have some significant success over a period of 1 or 2 years, it's our belief that that will attract the attention of the pharma companies. And if it doesn't, then I'll go knock on their door myself. Finally, clean biotics. This is not to be underestimated. This is a huge area of opportunity for our science. Effectively, skin is just a surface. It's all, albeit a very complex surface, but it's just a surface. We've now shown in the lab that effectively our science works on protecting pretty much any surface. So we now look at healthcare-acquired infection and that specific area of protecting surfaces within a healthcare environment. As I said, it prevents the latching of bacteria, skin, clothing, sheets, the air, and obviously there's a lot of testing to be done there. As I said before, MRSA strikes in intensive care in areas of vulnerability, operating theatres, geriatrics, etc. It is a huge market. That the healthcare-acquired associated infection market is $17.1 billion and rising at 6% a year. So, again, we're already talking to a couple of very large companies, one of which is an international super brand company, about how we would bring this, how this would work, both technically and commercially. So in terms of planning, the 5 pillars are there, the chain of work that we've got to do. We've already commercialized in SkinBioTherapeutics. Our commercial deal was done with Croda PLC, as I said. There are other areas within that sector. Croda deals specifically with cosmetic applications within the active skincare market. So there's areas of oral care, etc., hair care that are still available for us to seek partners therein. Axis Biotics, as I said, we're in advanced negotiations with some partners there. We hope to finalize the formulation of that very soon. We'd obviously have to run a clinical trial alongside that, but as I said, it's a much lower regulatory barrier than the next step, which is MediBiotics. We continue to pursue the regulatory pathway and registration. We continue the trials in eczema, and we'll be researching into further application areas there. In terms of pharmaceutical, we believe that Axis and Pharma are linked. We do need to seek some suitable partners for trials, and we'll continue our research there. Clean Biotics, we're looking at a development agreement with some global players now, and would also like to commence a side project on domestic applications. So we've got a long way to go, but as I say, we're already talking. In summary, the strategy has 5 channels. Each channel has multiple applications and multiple sub-channels. They're variations of the same proprietary proven science. We believe that at every step we take, every deal that we secure, will de-risk this core science at every step. we feel it's a very clear trajectory, we think it's very manageable, and we think it's extremely achievable. And that's me bang on time.
Stuart, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really interesting presentation, Stuart. The fundamental question, though, I don't get is if you prevent the latching of SA, why don't you prevent the latching of good bacteria and therefore significantly affect this skin biome?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean. Why would we want to prevent the latching of good bacteria?
No, your technology sounds like it prevents the latching. So if I apply it to my skin, what does that do to the bacteria, the good bacteria?
Oh, we're actually reinforcing the good bacteria. We are introducing good bacteria back to the skin. So the bacteria using Lactobacillus rhamnosus is a good bacteria. It's a probiotic.
And it doesn't prevent the latching of the other 999 bacteria?
No, it's no.
Can you talk us a bit about Croda? Sorry, I'm over here. Sorry. As it strikes me as a relatively small company, Croda massive. How does a relationship like that come about in the first place? And then a bit more. What does it mean? What practically is going to be happening there? What's the partnership entail?
That's a really good question. So we could have partnered with a cosmetic brand, but that would have limited us very much to that brand's individual customers and also the life cycle of that brand. We chose Croda purely and simply because their specialist division, Sederma, has 12,000 plus cosmetic customers. They provide ingredients to pretty much every major cosmetic brand on the planet. So firstly, it gives us a much broader access to those customers. It de-risks the science and validates the commercial viability of the product. But much more important, equally important to us was the fact that Croda have committed to build a specific bespoke line for SkinBioTherapeutics. They are going to manufacture our lysate en masse in bulk. And that's very important to us because we have the right now to buy that raw material back from Croda at little over cost that we can use in all of these other areas, access, medical, pharma, clean. We can use it across the board. Had we not done a deal with Croda and had we gone 3 steps up that regulatory staircase, if you like, we would have to have bought that raw material from a third party with a significant markup, or we would have had to build a manufacturing line for a couple of £1 million. So whilst the deal in itself doesn't come with an upfront payment, in our mind it kind of does. It just has a different bow on it. It's actually come with a significant saving, and we've now got a validated FTSE 100 quality supplier. So the way that the deal works is that they will be developing multiple variations, multiple strains of the science that will apply to anti-aging, to increasing the barrier, which will be used in cosmetic makeup, etc., etc. And they'll be selling variations of the theme to their 12,000 plus global customers.
So that's it. So you become an ingredient in those products.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So yes, Sederma aren't making a finished product. They're making SkinBioTherapeutics. They're making our lysate, which they'll have various strains of that they will sell to their customers, who will then, in turn, put it into their products and say new, improved, containing SkinBioTherapeutics, etc., etc.
So I agree. A very interesting presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the MediBiotics, the treatment for psoriasis and eczema.
Yes.
So are you looking to do a deal with a pharma there to run trials? Because presumably it's relatively expensive to do the trials.
Yeah, and right now we're at that regulatory crossroads where it will be dictated to us, and we will adjust our strategy accordingly, whether this is badged as a medical device or whether it's badged as a pharmaceutical, and that depends on how the mode of action's viewed by the regulators. You know, should we decide that we want to stick with medical devices, which we pretty much do, because the pharmaceutical route is so much longer and so much more expensive. So we think we'll end up very probably with a topical application, and we'll do the trial according to that regulatory judgment.
I think we are done. We're time up, so we're perfectly on time. Stuart, thank you very much indeed for coming this evening. Thank you, everybody.